Hey everyone. First, I'd just like to say thank you to everybody for attending our Turbocharging TeamCity with Octopus Deploy webinar. My name is Adam Close and I'm a continuous delivery architect here at Octopus Deploy, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. Our presenter for us is Derek Campbell. How are you today, Derek?
Hi Adam, I'm fantastic, thanks. Being in Scotland, unfortunately, it's a bit wintry today, so I'm wearing my thermal socks. What about yourself?
Yeah, really good, thank you. Looking forward to this presentation. On the weather front in the north of England, it's exactly the same, but it has stopped raining, so not all bad. So before we jump into the presentation and I hand over to Derek, just a little bit of housekeeping first. So you won't need to record the session today, as we'll be doing that. And we will post a link out after the webinar is finished, about 24 to 48 hours afterwards. At the end of the presentation, we'll also have some time for a Q&A, and there's a couple of ways for you to post your questions to us. You can either use the Q&A functionality in Zoom, and I'll be monitoring that, or you can go over to octopus.com/Slack and join our webinar channel. Post your questions in there, and we'll put Derek in the hot seat at the end of today's presentation and ask him those questions. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Derek.
Excellent, thank you very much, Adam. Okay, let's jump down and have a look at the agenda. So today we're going to jump in and we're going to have a little bit of a discussion around what continuous integration and continuous delivery is. We'll then jump in and discuss what's TeamCity, then Octopus Deploy. And what we're going to do is tie both of those together and then do a live demonstration where we're going to take an application, we're going to build it, we're going to package it, and then we're going to push it to Octopus and then run through some deployments. And as Adam said, we're going to run through some questions at the end. So certainly, if you've got any questions, get in touch. So let's jump in. Okay, so what is continuous integration? Well, it's commonly known as CI as part of the CICD process. And what continuous integration is the practice of merging all developers' working copies to a shared mainline several times a day. What that generally means is commit your code more often and run through your tests and whatnot. What is continuous delivery? That's a really good question. Really what it is continuous delivery is an approach in which teams break down their software into smaller cycles, just ensuring that the software can be more reliably released to dev, test, production at any time. Aims at effectively testing more often, being able to release more often with greater speed and frequency and consistency as well. It doesn't really matter if it's, you can have all the speed and frequency in the world unless it's consistent. Okay, so what is TeamCity? It's an intelligent continuous integration server which you can use to build your application, run through your tests. You can also use it to track your code and build quality. So for instance, if it's going up over time or if it's coming down over time, and then that'll allow you to make better decisions going forward. It's got some really key integrations, you may find that it's got in technologies, one of them being Octopus, but along with things like Azure, AWS, Terraform, and all those types of technologies. And I'll show you that later today in today's webinar. If you're familiar as well, you can also, if you're familiar with auto-scaling groups, you can use it to, spin up and spin down your cloud environments as well. So yeah, as you can see, it's very, very flexible. And the good thing is obviously it comes it comes with on-premise, but you can host it in the cloud as well. With this as well, one of the things to check out, if you check out jetbrains.com, you can download it and install it. And with that, you can actually have a free version, which comes with up to 100 build configurations and 3 build agents for free. The thing that I find generally is really useful about this is that it really gets you up and running and playing about with TeamCity. And recently I actually ran a workshop in London for 35 people, and everyone was able to get their build configurations there and run all this on 3 build agents as well, which is super useful. And really the question here is, what can't it do? So let's jump into TeamCity briefly. So So this is TeamCity. What you've got here is OctoFX. I just for the most part want to, that's for later on. As you can see, this is where you would configure your project. You can actually configure things like your visible projects. I'm a big fan of just configuring the application that I'm currently working on. It allows me to be more focused. What you can do is you can come up here, you can up to administration. You can create your project, so it's, you can build it from straight from a repository as well. You can specify where you want it to go, specify the repository URL. In this instance, I'm just going to do this manually. Demo. So I've already got one called demo, so let's just call it demo 2. And then there you go. You've got your project. It's now ready to be configured. So you can create some build configurations straight away from it. And then you've got some configuration templates. So you can create your configuration templates to allow for the reuse of these. So for instance, if you're doing a lot of .NET, builds and packages, you can create those configuration templates so that it can be reused at further times to make it much easier. And as well as that, you've got some sub projects which can be used to group build configurations and so forth. So let's jump back into administration. So what you've got here is you've got some really great information up here with the project related settings, such as build time. So it can, as you can see, generally about 30 minutes. Or you've got some disk usage, server health. This is where you can create and configure your users and groups. You can map it to Active Directory as well. With this is you also have tools. And with this is where you would install your tools. So you can install things like sysinternals, all that sort of good stuff as well, NUnit and so forth. And as you can see, there's a lot of ones. These all came pre-installed. The only one I've actually had to install today was NuGet. And so for instance, if you're doing a lot with Maven, you can download. So again, it can grab all this information for you. If you want, you can also do betas as well. If you're very ambitious, you can also do alphas. So what you can do is you can download these directly, and it's really straightforward. You can say, for instance, which has got 3.50, add it. And then that's you. As you can see, very, very easy to use. Along with that is you've got the plugin list as well. This is actually, let's have a look. So as you can see, I already have Octopus Deploy integration installed. And with that, you can get that from, if you go into octopus.com, resources, downloads. And then from here, as you can see, it's center of the web page. It's like download, which will take you to the Octopus Deploy integration. And what you can do is like install it direct. I think this is really great. Maybe I don't have to download it and then upload it, and then you just activate it. But from that, what you can do as well is there's a whole bunch of tools. You've got a lot of different tools that you can use. So for instance, if it was AWS, you've got some CloudFormation, Azure DevOps, Terraform. If you're doing a lot with Terraform, then obviously you can install that as well. Okay, so this is, and along with that, there's a whole bunch of bundled plugins, which are also very, very useful as well. Some Docker support, .NET build runners, all that sort of good stuff. Okay, so let's, that is TeamCity. And where TeamCity leaves off is, but it exits, is where Octopus Deploy takes over. And what it does is Octopus it does one thing. It does it really well, and it does deployment automation. It's a tool that you can use to once you upload the packages, you can use it to automate all of your deployments. That's infrastructure, database, packaged applications, Azure functions, all that sort of good stuff. You can use it to automatically promote releases between environments or deploy to different environments. And the key thing that I find with Octopus is that it's repeatable, reliable, and consistent. And the reason for that is that you use the same deployment process between dev, test, pre-prod, and production in all of your different applications, all your different environments. And I think that's key. It really gives you that consistency, and you generally know what the outcome will be, and hopefully it's a successful deployment. One of the benefits of Octopus, and one of the things that I've always really liked, is it's API first. Well, it has been for quite some time now. But anything you can do in the user interface, you can do over the API. And also it comes in 2 different flavors where we have now hosted our V2 of cloud, where it's hosted on Azure Kubernetes service. So you can spin that up on our cloud and then just get going very easily. However, we generally find as well that most organizations are still using on-premise or hosting it on Azure, AWS or Google, for instance, as well. But we do still have a lot of customers who are hosting on their own data centers. And on the 1st of September, we launched our free starter edition, which will give you up to 10 deployment targets. So you can jump onto octopus.com and download that. So along with TeamCity, you can follow along with this webinar, along with the resources that we'll send at the end of today's webinar, and you can run through this if this is something that you would want to do. So let's jump in and have a look at Octopus. So this is Octopus. What you've got down here on the left-hand side is your projects. Projects tend to be things which are shipped or deployed at the same time. So for instance, if you're shipping monolithic applications which are all self-contained, where what you've got is, for instance, it could well be a public-facing website and with a back end of a MySQL or a MS SQL database, or with some peripherals and maybe an Azure function. It could well be Windows Service as well. You can ship all those together under a single project. If you're using the microservices application architecture, you may find that you've got several hundred projects. And with that, some of the things to consider is project groups here, but you may find Spaces is also an approach for you where you can logically group those microservices better together. Okay, so across the top here, you have your environments as well. And environments are, it's your typical dev, test, pre-prod and production. And one of the things that I have always really liked about Octopus is this dashboard. It gives you a clear idea of what version is where in a high-level overview. So, for instance, you can see that today we deployed at 1 p.m. 2019.11.13.46. And then in production, which is 2019.10.21.26. So let's jump into our project. So as you can see, each project actually has its own dashboard as well, and this gives you an idea of what version. So for instance, you can see what release is where. You can obviously just deploy as well, so that's really handy. Let's jump in, and this is what I was just mentioning earlier on with your deployment process. So what you've got here is a single deployment process, and what this does is this is a single deployment process for all of your different environments. And what you can do here is configure it once and then reuse it, and which is super, super useful. Okay, so next up is infrastructure. In the infrastructure tab, this is where you configure things like your Azure service principals, your deployment targets, policies and so forth, but all your environments. But let's have a look at deployment targets. If you select, you've got add deployment target. By default, Octopus has Windows targets which support listening and polling tentacles. Linux and listening and polling tentacles, along with SSH connections as well. If you want, you can also deploy to a Mac. One of the ones that we see a lot of customers using is Azure Platform as a Service, where, for instance, you have Azure Web Apps, Service Fabric clusters. You also have Kubernetes clusters. And lastly, you have offline package drops and cloud regions. In the library area, what you've got here is some things like certificates. You can also post your artifacts or your packages into Octopus for deployment, or you can also integrate it to an external feed. So for instance, if you were using something like Artifactory, you could pull that in directly. Additionally, you can also pull it over from TeamCity as well. And within the configuration tab, this is where you set all those good things like users, groups, authentication providers, and everything in between. Okay, so let's jump back and have a look at a typical CICD pipeline. So what we've got here is what I generally find most CICD pipelines look like. You've normally got a developer, developer's coding away, and they'll normally, well, hopefully they're checking in their code several times a day. And the source control is normally something like GitHub, GitLab, or SVN. And what TeamCity can do is you can configure TeamCity to monitor the source control system. And then once those check-ins come in, you can configure it to run your build your code, run all of your tests. That's your unit tests, your integration tests. You can run it security tests, load tests, and everything in between. You then create your artifact. You can push your built artifacts over to Octopus or an external location that Octopus can pull in. And then you can use the plugin, which I've shown you earlier on, to then tell Octopus to go ahead and deploy. You generally find that most development environments are normally triggered by a build or a schedule. So you normally find that you can check in, you just want that to go straight to development. You may find that a QA or a tester comes in and then manually promotes that, but you can also automate that as well. For instance, if you're doing your regression testing, in fully automated CICD pipeline, you can get to production without a single click. And then lastly, you normally find there's a web admin or a DBA who's, needs to maybe run a few SQL scripts or potentially just double check that the package that's about to be applied to the database is correct. Okay, so that's your CI/CD pipeline. So let's jump back over and we can talk through OctoFX. So let's, as I was saying earlier on, let's hide demo 2. Let's keep it nice and clean. Okay, so what you've got here is OctoFX. I just want to provide some context here. So let's jump over. One thing to be aware of is this particular solution is available on our Octopus samples, and we'll send this over as part of the email. However, what you have here is OctoFX is a sample application that we've built, and it's the purpose of it is to allow us to demonstrate how we can deploy multi-tier applications using Octopus Deploy. Further context is that OctoFX is a fictitious London-based online foreign exchange company, and they have a platform that they have customers, both retail and consumers alike, where they log on and can trade currencies. And generally, this is underpinned by 3 separate things. You've got a full framework.NET website, which is underpinned by a Microsoft SQL database, which stores all of the exchange rates. And then lastly, you have a Windows service, which updates those exchange rates as the exchange rate changes throughout the day. Okay, so let's jump back to TeamCity. What we're going to do is we'll talk through some of the reasons why there's 5 build configurations. You can't do all this under a single configuration. There are a few ways to cut this up. However, I'm a big fan of having really granular steps and having individual build configurations. The reason I generally find it's best practice, the reason is if you, for instance, have a package which you've checked in, it's built, it's created the package, it's then pushed it, it's then created a release with an Octopus, and then it gets to the deployment of development or even test, and your Windows sysadmin is in the middle of restarting or applying some patches. What can happen is the deployment fails. The benefit of this is that you can log in and then just rerun the step that's applicable to you, rather than having to build all your code and then run through all your tests as well. What you'll generally find is it's just generally a little bit easier to rerun tasks, but hopefully that doesn't happen. Okay, so let's jump in and have a quick look. Okay, so go into the configuration. What you've got here is OctoFX. This is just some high-level information. Actually, sorry, one thing. This is OctoFX. We've got these build configurations under here. And again, you can actually, for instance, you could create all of these as configuration templates and then use them from there. Let's have a look at build, package, and push. Okay, so this is just a general settings, some information like build configuration ID, build number format, all that sort of good stuff. what you've got here is you can attach your VCS route. In this instance, I'm just pointing it to the master of the OctoFX repository. And what this is doing is this is just monitoring for any check-ins. But you can, if you're using something like Gitflow, you could use release branching. And as soon as that's checked in, you can take that all the way through to production if you wish. Okay, so oops, I went a little bit too far there. So next one is this is 3 steps. In this instance, we're going to be restoring the NuGet packages, which I was showing you earlier on how to get that onto TeamCity. From here, you're installing your NuGet packages. And what we're doing here is this is a built-in step. I just want to take a moment to just show you the different types of build runners. For instance, as this is a .NET full framework website, you would use something like Octopack. However, you can also build your .NET Core applications on this as well. For instance, if you're using Docker or MS Build or NuGet installers, along with that, you do have your 6 steps here, which are activated only when you install your Octopus Deploy plugin. And if you wish to, you can use it to to run some PowerShell scripts and all that good stuff. What you've got here is we're specifying the version of NuGet. We're then, as we've cloned the repository, we're going to build a solution, which you can see if you come into source in the GitHub repository. It's just listed here. And then from here, what you've got is you're restoring the NuGet packages, and this gives you everything locally. There is a restore option. I'm a big fan of ticking this box. The main reason is it's effectively the same. It's equivalent to running the no cache NuGet command. What this does is I generally find it takes a little bit longer to run. However, it gives you a better end product and a more reliable end product. And you can have some command lines here. One thing to be aware of is you may find that you don't have access to the internet from your TeamCity server. So likelihood is you may use this, or additionally, you can actually use something like MyGit. You may find that you have to use pre-approved versions of certain NuGet packages. So this is where you could specify some of this information. There are some update package options down here, but for the most part, I'm just going to skip over those. The next step, anyone who is using Visual Studio will be used to this. You'll normally have to build your Visual Studio solution, and then from there, you're specifying your solution here, you're specifying the version. Just so you're aware, you don't have to run the latest and greatest version of Visual Studio. If you're still using 2017 or 2015, that's great as well. It goes all the way back to 2005 as well. You may have to add in some additional items for these to work. If you're using Visual Studio 2005, I am probably going to ask you some questions. Okay, what we're doing now is we're targeting rebuild. The reason we're specifying rebuild here is that this will give you a fully clean build solution. And it's generally just better, particularly within TeamCity. We're also going to be doing the release configuration. The reason for this is that there are things that we configure around this, which, for instance, if you don't use release, it won't create your NuGet packages, which are controlled by using new spec files. And so that's something to have a look at. You can specify things like version, but for the most part, I'm just not going to, I just tend to use the default. Now, one thing to be aware of, as you can see here, we've got the Octopus packaging. This is only again activated when we have the Octopus plugin enabled. And what we've got here is we're going to specify to use Octopack. This does not work with .NET Core applications, so that's something to be aware of. What we're doing is we're using Octopack to package up our applications and create our NuGet packages as part of our new spec files. You could, for instance, at this point, choose to publish it straight to the Octopus server, along with the URL and the API key. Okay, the reason we're not using this today is with this particular configuration, we're using the TeamCity space, and as you can see, there's no option to specify that. This is a limitation with Octopack. The reason how we've got around that is by pushing Octopus packages afterwards. So as you can see, if you come in, you're using the runner type of Octopus Deploy push packages. And then what we've got here is we're specifying the URL and the API key, along with the space name. And what we've got here is we are specifying, we're specifying the package path as well. So what we've got here is we've specified one thing to be aware of is the URL and the API key. And these can all be parameterized. The reason I haven't done this is just to give you full visibility of what we're doing today in TeamCity and show that it's an active deployment. What we've got here now is we have got some configuration around here with the package path patterns. So we've specified the checkout directory. The reason we have used this is that with agents, agents are the workhorse of TeamCity. And with that is you can have lots of different agents. For instance, Octopus uses TeamCity as well. And we use dynamic build agents. So we can actually have, for instance, between 5 and over 100 build agents going at any one time, just depending on the required workload. And what this does is this means that any servers that you're adding as build agents, this will be the local checkout directory, meaning you don't have to hard code a central location for TeamCity to work with a file. So in this instance, we're using, and just so you're aware, I definitely recommend having a look at some of the predefined parameters. They'll really make your day easier. From here, if you can have a look, we've came all over. We're specifying the nut-keg or the NuGet package here that we're building. And for instance, we're seeing octofx.database.2019 build number and then the extension. Similar with that, we have this configured for the rate service and the trading website. Okay. And one thing to be aware of is you may want to have a look at the overwrite mode. I'm a big fan of overwriting existing. The main reason is you may have to stick to a certain build, and if you do this, then this overwrite option will help. Okay, and then let's go back. So those are your 3 steps. Next up is triggers. I'll just take a moment just to explain what's happening with this. So in here, you've got your VCS trigger. This VCS stands for your version control system, and what this is normally your GitHub, GitLab, etc. And what you've got is you've got a trigger that what this basically means is it will trigger a build each time it's checked in, and it gives you a lot of granular control. So certainly check this out based on your requirements. You can edit your trigger rules here. Along with your VCS trigger, you do have a few options. One would be schedule. So one of the things that you can do with this is you can schedule at a certain time. So for instance, like I showed you earlier on, you may find that you want to kick something off TeamCity. You also have a similar concept within Octopus as well. So you can schedule a build every morning if you wish from all the changes from the day before. That really just is dependent on how big your solution is. You can also have a finished build trigger. We're going to be using the finished build trigger today. Each one of our steps is chained, so this means that it has a finished build trigger for the previous step. I'll show you that in the later steps. You also have remote branch run triggers, Maven triggers, and NuGet dependency triggers. One of my favorite ones is the retry build trigger. And what this basically means is it will retry the build if it fails, etc., or it meets certain criteria. The way I see this is for the Windows people there who obviously are familiar with services crashing. There's normally an option around there what you can do, what happens after a failed service crash, for instance. It's much like that. Okay, let's jump over. Next step is create release. This is just a single step. As you can see, there's no version control and there's no VCS being specified in the rest of the steps. The main reason is we've got that dealt with in the first step. Okay, so next one is our Octopus Deploy create release runner type. Specify the URL, API key, space name, project, and then the release number. As again, you've got some environments down here that you can do. So what you could do is you could create the release and then automatically trigger a deployment to development. Again, I really do like that granular control. You might find that I just find it just works better. What you've got here is it's under the advanced that you've got some tenants and tenant tags. If you're interested in tenants and tenant tags, Ryan Russo done a really great webinar on tenants in Octopus just last week. I'd definitely check it on our YouTube channel, or if you check out octopus.com/events, it's listed there. One thing to be aware of, this button, the show deployment progress. For the most part, this is a fantastic button, and I would always recommend doing it. The main reason for this is what this does is it pulls everything back from Octopus. So, for instance, all of your logs from Octopus are actually being pulled back into TeamCity. The benefit here is that you may have someone that you want to give access to TeamCity, but not necessarily Octopus. There may be some role separation here, which may be beneficial. However, this is something to consider. I will show you an example later on where I would normally recommend disabling it. The reason I say that is in production, we have a manual approval step, much like we showed in the CICD image earlier on. You normally find that there's some management or project management or customer sign-off required. And what you'll find is if you tick this button, it will hold up a build agent unnecessarily. And for instance, if your approval process takes more than 10 minutes, which is the default time, then the deployment will fail, or unless you specify an additional wait time for it. However, in production, if you have to go through an approval step, I would likely disable this step. Next up is triggers. It's just a finish build trigger. What this does is it automatically kicks off this trigger as part of this once the previous step is done. Okay, the next three steps are effectively identical. The only difference is that where the environment is that it's actually being deployed to. So if you come in, what you've got here, you've got your deploy to development, you're using your deploy release, you're specifying the Octopus URL, the API key. I will show you how to use it, how to generate an API key in just a moment. And then you're specifying the TeamCity. If you can specify your Octopus version, but if you're using 2 or 1, I'd probably look at upgrading. And then you're specifying the space name again, the project, the release number, and the environment. Again, we've got that show deployment button option here as well. Okay, so let's jump over to test. What we've got here is deploy to test. It's very much the same. It's the same URL, same API key. However, you can use different API keys based on your permission and sign-off requirements. You get the space name, the project name, release number, again, test, and you probably guessed it, we've ticked the box. And then lastly, we've got the finish build trigger. One last step just to double check. Deploy to production. Same idea, same step. We're almost there, please bear with me. And then from here, you've got the URL, API key, space name, project, release number, and the show deployment progress. The reason I'm going to keep this is we'll approve hopefully in under a minute, and there'll be no issues there. And then lastly, we've got that trigger. Okay, so that's for the most part, that's the configuration done of TeamCity. Let's jump over to Octopus. So like I was showing earlier on, actually one thing to be aware of, the API key. If you come in, you can, if you come in, what we have is a concept of service accounts. In this instance, we've got TeamCity. So earlier on, if you wish, you can just come in, select your user. Again, general best practice here is use a user, embed it into a team, and then from there, assign your associated privileges. So you can come in and just select new API key, type in demo, or whichever the purpose is, select generate new, and that will give you an API key. I'm not going to press that button because people who are quick enough can get access to our demo Octopus instance. So Spaces. Spaces is something that we only launched earlier on in the year, and as you can see, there's a few spaces here. What you can do is what you've got here. This is what you would see in a new space creation. It's effectively exactly like an Octopus, like a clean Octopus server. In this instance, though, it's my Blue Peter moment. I have already gone ahead and created the project, which is called OctoFX. I have run through some deployments as part of my run through today, so hopefully you can get a working deployment, which is great. So let's jump in and have a quick look at the deployment process. As I mentioned earlier on, this is something you only ever have to configure once per project. In fact, if you check out multi-tenancy, you could actually you could effectively have a deployment process which you could reuse over and over and over again. Like for instance, we have one customer who has 1,000 tenants, 4 environments, and it's a single project. So that's 4,000 potential deployments, all controlled by a single deployment process, which I think is awesome. However, what you've got here, it's step number 1 is you have approved deployment. Approved deployment, this is something we see when a lot of customers normally find that it's actually one of my favorite steps, is that when you're in a heavily regulated environment, this is something we see quite a lot. What this is this is an approval step. You can have it so you can specify things like the teams, you can specify where it runs. In this instance, don't be like Derek and specify everyone. I mean, I'm actually going to be doing my approval as well, which is just purely for today's webinar. But you can, for instance, if you wish, you can have approval logged for every single environment, or in this instance, we're just using it for production. Okay, so let's jump in to the next few steps. The next 4 steps are pretty much identical. These are all actually community contributed steps, but effectively what we're doing here is just we're doing the SQL work. What this means is anything we're going to be running through, we're going to be creating the SQL user, creating the database all on the fly, and then from here we're going to create the database user if it doesn't exist, and then add the database user to the role. If you have a quick look, you'll see that this is only running on OctoFX DB runner. And what this is this is going to run on a database runner or a management box or a Bastion box. The reason is we don't normally recommend installing tentacles directly on SQL servers. The main reason is purely for security. You don't want to be opening that up to the public, or for instance, I generally just want to keep it back behind a few layers. So it's purely for that. What you've got here is some variables. I will speak about variables in just a moment, but what you've got here is you're specifying the OctoFX database server, admin user, admin password, user, and password. The only reason, for instance, we're using an admin is that we're creating these, so we're creating the database and all that sort of good stuff. So we require that level of authority. I'll skip over the next few steps. What we've got now is we're doing the MS SQL deployment. Again, what this is doing, you're running it on the database runner, and this has access to the SQL server, which can then run. So in this instance, we're actually deploying this to a VM in Azure. We also have a database here as well. So we're specifying the package. You know, there's some configuration variables. These are available in most steps. So if you're interested, definitely check out, you know, if you want to do some substitution of variables, that's great. Check them out. Next up is we are deploying the Azure Web App. So what we've got here is we're running this on the OctoFX server. And one thing to be aware of is next week we're running a Octo 101 session with Mark Harrison, and Mark will actually take this application and deploy it. He'll take it through and configure it from beginning to scratch in Octopus. So that's one to keep an eye on. So what we're doing here is we're running this on the OctoFX web environment, target role. We're using the built-in Octopus server package feed. We've specified the package ID, which is the website. There are some options around here. So for instance, if you want to, it needs to go to a certain physical path or a deployment slot, then you can put them in. Lastly, we're going to deploy the Windows service, which is going to update all of our exchange rates. And this is running on the rate service. This is just a server that has a tentacle installed on it. Again, we're specifying the package. We've got some options around here. So for instance, we're using a built-in Octopus variable. And what this will mean is when it creates the Windows service, it's going to name it OctoFX dash and then the environment name. So for development, it would be OctoFX dash development. The main reason we have that is that we're sharing the rate service server across dev, test, and production. Please don't give me any trouble, but ultimately what it is, it's just to keep the infrastructure easier to deploy to, or also keep my costs down. So you've also got the executable as well. And so some details around here, you're specifying the exe, some startup, you may want to run it as a custom user, startup mode automatic and all that sort of good stuff. Again, you've got some features that you can configure, but that's the deployment process. Next up is variables. Variables is something that generally changes between environment. Think about it like a SQL connection string. I generally find that most projects will change, the MS SQL connection string will change as you go through your environments. Well, at least I hope so. And you can configure all of this in your variables. As you can imagine, this becomes very, very useful as you scale. So what you do is we've got the admin password. Let's just bring this over. So you can actually create something and then store it as a sensitive variable so that you never, so you can actually put your passwords, or it integrates with Key Vault as well. And with that, we have, so obviously you get the password, you've got the username, you can define the scopes as well. You can define things like production, test as well. We've got database names that change. Again, this is only because we have the shared infrastructure. And then lastly, as you can see, we've got different usernames, different passwords, the same server here, but they're all configured to different environments. You can configure it to target roles, different targets, deployment stats, and all that good stuff. And then lastly is the actual connection string, which I think is very useful. The main reason I find this useful is it's a variable within a variable. So what we're going to do is as it goes through, deploy to dev, the server won't change. However, the database name, the user ID, the database password, and then these all change as you go. Okay, so this is this. What we've got now is, discard changes. You can go into the infrastructure tab. As you can see, this is where you can confirm your environments, configure. You've got development, test, and production. From here, you've got as you can see, each has 3. 2 of these are shared. You also technically should have 4 here, as you also have the SQL box, but we've only got the jump box here. So you've got your Azure Web App and then the rate service. And this is where you configure these. Okay, let's get deploying. Right, so what we've got here, back to TeamCity, select run. And then at this point, what's now going to happen is I'm now going to talk to you for the next 10 minutes. Well, all of this is completely automated. It's going to push everything through. I realize you probably should have some tests. Certainly build that into your CI server. But this is just for demo and for today's webinar. Okay, so what you've got now is this is going to go run through. It's going to run through, and this is actually it's got everything here. So TeamCity doesn't actually run anything locally. It all runs on build agents. That's your workhorse. And how you can configure this is you would add them in. And these can be on dedicated VMs. You can use them as Docker containers, all that sort of good stuff. There you go. You can come in and you can actually have dynamic build agents. You can have compatible configurations. So you can have like dedicated, you may have some projects which have really strange configurations, and you can have just like dedicated ones as well. So what we should find is we come back to the projects. Okay, 19. So this is going. And what we've got now is we come in and have a look. Oops, one moment. Let's have a look at the build log. So what we've got here is we have 3 steps that we've configured. It's restoring the NuGet packages. We've all got them here. It's beginning. There we go. We're building the packages and then we're publishing the artifacts. And as you can see here, if you come in here, we've got our Octo trading website, the database, the rate service. We've got some smoke tests, but we're not going to be using those today. And then lastly, in step 3, and this is where you'll start beginning to see the usage of the Octopus plugin. You've got octo.exe. And then what this is doing is which comes bundled as part of the plugin. It's pushing it to the server, specifying the API key, the space, and then the packages. And as you imagine, you've got the 3 packages which I've specified earlier on, which is octofx.database, octofx.rate service, and then lastly the trading website. And if we jump over to Octopus at this point, what we should find is we come in, as you can see, actually, it's great because we've got a deployment already happening. Come into library, come into packages, and as you can see, we have the 3 packages, 2019.11.19. And if we come in here, we've got 19. So you can see that these have only just been uploaded 3 minutes ago. Okay. Okay, so what we now have is the next step is create release. This has already created a release for us, which is great. We come into the build log. This one's really straightforward. Let's just run an octo.exe create release, specifying the server, API, space, project, and then the version. And then as you can see, everything is looking good. So it's handshaking with the server and it's created environments. Created the release. Come back now. What we should see is AutoFX. Test is already as well, which is fantastic. So one of the things to be aware of, you can come in, select your build log, select the step, and as you can see here, it's running the octo.exe deploy release. It's specifying all the details as before, but now it's actually running through your deployment. As you can see, step 2, 3, 4 through to 8 it's running through and has been successful, which is great. As you can see, step 1 hasn't run, which is your manual intervention, and the only reason that hasn't run is it's only configured to run in production. As I was showing you earlier on, you can get all this granular information. Again, with that, if we have a look, we should also see that development has already been successful. So this is what we have got here is the task summary. This is, for the most part, this is generally all you'll ever need to see. But you can jump into the task log. You can see that there's some SQL users being created, the database being created, all this sort of good stuff. And then it's adding the database to the role. It's acquiring the packages. It's running through the MS SQL deployment. It's updating the app settings, application, and connection strings, which is great. And then it's also deploying the Azure Web App, which is great. I love this step where it's when it's deploying the Azure Web App. You've got here, mostly because I'm lazy. And as you can see here, we have a successful website. So you can come in, you can get your quote. And to get your quote, you need to log in. I should take yes, there we go. And then back to the home page. So we have a development, as you can see, octofx-dev, azurewebsites.net. And then let's come back. Okay, so the reason I want to come back, I'm going to skip over test just now. The reason is I want to show you what a manual intervention approval looks like. So what you've got here is now, you can see here, you've got the little orange eye. What this means is the task is waiting for manual intervention. So you want to come in, assign it to me or your database administrator. You can include some instructions and you can say for the wrestling fans amongst us, because The Rock said so. Okay, select proceed. And then now you've logged, and this is one of the things is you've logged an approval, which is great. What I'll do, whilst that goes through your goes through to test, this should kick off. Just so you will see either here is green is good. There's 3 separate logos. Red is bad, and then and then orange is the manual intervention step, which I showed you. So as you can see here, we've got a working deployment and test. Again, we'll come into the task log, jump in and have a look at the deployment. So we're creating the database if it doesn't exist. We've got all this. We're going through your here. The deployment servers are looking great. And then again, we've got an Azure Web App, and then lastly, we're deploying the Windows service. As you can see here, it's put it into a new directory, which is named in 2019.11.19. Let's click on the test website. This should spin up. Whilst that's coming up, let's just pop back to TeamCity. Select test. And what you can see here, in here, you've got your build log. So open this up, much like we have earlier on. we've got octo.exe deploying the release, specifying everything here. You run through here, you've got all the information. And then it's put all the passwords in. It's going through, and as you can see, we've got all this information in TeamCity as well. It may be overkill. You may just want to kick it off, but that's entirely up to you. Okay, jump over, and we have a working test website. Let's press that get a quote button. There we go. So close that off. Let's go back, and we have, go to the overview. We have a successful deployment to production as well. So that's it. Ta-da! Okay, so let's just have a quick look through the logs. Everything is green. Everything's looking great. You need some more information, you can. You've got, so it's went through here. It's created everything, all the SQL infrastructure. It's deployed the Azure Web App from here. And then it'll just spin up the application for that. So we should just jump back here to TeamCity. And then what we've got here is we've got everything green as well. So everything has been success. So what we've done today is we've pulled down the repository. We've built it. We've packaged up the applications that we want to deploy. We've pushed them through to Octopus. We've created the release using the plugin. We've then run through a deployment to development. We've deployed to test. Lastly, we've then deployed to production, and we have a working website in octofx-production.azurewebsites.net. Okay, and as you can see, let's just jump back quickly. Overview, everything is green, everyone's happy, go home and enjoy yourself. Okay, that's it. Adam, do we have any questions?
We do have a couple of questions, Derek. So I'll give you the first one from Abigail. Is there a way to trigger TeamCity builds with parameters passed in?
Yes, you should be. What I'd probably do there is, if you want to, pop that into the webinar channel, and we can chat about that afterwards, if that's okay.
Cool. Yeah, I'll mention that to Abigail. And the second question from Vasu. Is there a way to enter a comment as part of approval? So I suppose that could mean some instructions for the group and also a comment once when you're actually doing the approval.
Yeah, certainly. What you can do here is you can come into the process. You can come into approve deployment. And then, for instance, what you could do, you can actually just put it in here. And one of the things that you can actually even do as well is you can also insert a variable. So you could, what we actually see sometimes is people putting in like telephone numbers and like contact information, like talk to this person for approval sort of thing. But yeah, if you wish, what you can do is insert text here for Vasu. Yeah, you can put this in, or what you can do is when you're approving it, you can also put in your, I have run through this. This is all good. Everything's there. So yeah.
Thanks. Great question. Great answer. Thank you, Derek.
Yeah, no problem at all.
The last question from Patrick. What ways are there to deploy to a Linux machine? Is it just SSH?
No, it's not. That's a really great question. Actually, something it's really cool is we've only just launched this in the past few months. Well, the tentacles anyway. So if you come into your infrastructure tab and come into deployment targets, you select add deployment targets, come into Linux. So you can install your listening tentacle and then your polling tentacle. But you can also do SSH. There are a few prerequisites, much like anything with .NET Core, has to have things like mono, etc. But yeah, certainly check out the website. There's some more information, or get in touch. We've got an email address at advice@octopus.com where we can have a chat as well. But yeah, you can definitely do listening polling tentacles. This is something that I think it was only in September, and it's something it's good for people who have advanced security requirements where you need that, as you can imagine. It's not a lot of system administrators want to open up, SSH connections for Octopus. So obviously there's some benefits there with your listening and polling tentacles. So that functionality is very similar to the our Windows approach.
Great, thank you for that, Derek. I think we've got time for one more question from Peter. What are your recommendations for deploying versions from feature branches? How do you name the version?
That's really, to be honest, that's a great question, Peter. To be honest, there's a lot of really kind of information out there, but I personally, I like my, Simvel personally. Obviously, I'll date name, big fan of it, and to be honest, like you'll see it within Octopus. You can jump on, and I find that I just find it's easier. But to be honest, there's lots of best practices, and I'd definitely check out just semantic versioning. Obviously, definitely break it into kind of major, minor parts as well.
Cool. Thank you for that, Derek. I believe that actually wraps up the questions.
Excellent.
Okay. So firstly, thank you everyone for joining us today. And just before I wrap this up, Derek has put some resources together today for us relating to today's webinar. These will be sent out with the recording 24 to 48 hours after we finish today. The resources will include things like octopus.com docs, some videos, and some Octopus code samples. There'll also be a link to our new events page, which some of you may have already seen, octopus.com/events, and also some information on our new free license that we introduced earlier this year. The free starter edition allows you to deploy to 10 deployment targets free forever. And then lastly, before we finish, our upcoming webinars that we have an Octopus 101 with myself and Mark Harrison on November 20th. That's basically going to cover starting from scratch with Octopus Deploy to deploy an application out to some production applications. We also have a Turbocharging Jenkins with Octopus on December 11th, just after we release our new Jenkins plugin. And also a webinar on our new runbooks feature in Octopus Deploy, which will be on January 2020. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.